Welcome to the Trump Breaking News Network, your daily source for up-to-the-minute Trump news. Join us today and every day. Here's today's news.
This is TBNN.
A perspective about Donald Trump, the FBI director, and North Korea you'll never see from mainstream media. By Arjun Waliam. I think it's safe to say at this point that the American political system has become one big joke. Presidential races, for the most part, now serve merely as entertainment, meant to captivate the attention of millions of people rather than stand as forums to discuss the many real issues our world currently faces. What's more, leaks from various sources, such as Wikileaks and insider whistleblowers, have confirmed time and time again that most, if not all, presidential candidates have become political slaves to the much larger hand dominating geopolitics. Political parties exist to secure responsible government and to execute the will of the people. From these great tasks both of the old parties have turned aside. Instead of instruments to promote the general welfare, they have become the tools of corrupt interests which use them impartially to serve their selfish purposes. Behind the ostensible government sits enthroned an invisible government owing no allegiance and acknowledging no responsibility to the people. To destroy this invisible government, to dissolve the unholy alliance between corrupt business and corrupt politics is the first task of the statesmanship of the day. Theodore Roosevelt, 26th President of the United States. Roosevelt is just one of many presidents and politicians to reveal the existence of this secret government throughout the ages. Some say this secret government is comprised of a few very powerful corporations that control all aspects of our lives, from the military-industrial complex, healthcare, and finance to education, politics, and more. Above this government we have the world of finance, and if you follow the money that's where it'll take you. This is something we must realize, as every single year presidents become frontmen for decisions that are made beyond their control or consent. They are simply figureheads, meant to receive both blame and praise for decisions given to them to enact. Perhaps they are offered financial incentives as well, but it's impossible to say. What does seem evident is a global economic agenda, a new world order plan to destabilize multiple countries and force a global political will on its inhabitants. This isn't really a secret. We have whistleblowers like 4-star General Wesley Clark, who was the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe of NATO from 1997 to 2000, for instance, describing how the U.S. had plans to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq, and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off, Iran. We also have clear instances of false flag terrorism, something that Putin referred to when speaking publicly about the recent chemical attacks in Syria. The secret government, corporate and financial control, the relationship between big business and government, false flag terrorism, these are all important things to be aware of when contemplating what's really going on with the presidency, particularly since the mainstream media is painting another picture entirely. The media is the most powerful entity on earth. They have the power to make the innocent guilty and to make the guilty innocent, and that's power. Because they control the minds of the masses. One thing is for certain, regardless of how much mainstream media and the establishment praise or denounce a president, very little actually changes. The same agenda seems to continue being propagated, and a great quote comes to mind here: Democrats and Republicans are two wings of the same bird, and the flight path doesn't change. A perspective on Trump you won't hear from the mainstream. Bombs are still being dropped, and the terror war industry is still running rampant under the Trump administration, just as it was in previous years. Islamic terror is still cited as a problem, without any mention of the fact that Western intelligence agencies have had their hand in creating false flag terrorism to heighten the national security state for a long time. These powers orchestrate events, like creating fake terrorist videos, or even arming the very terrorists they are claiming to oppose, to justify military intervention into other countries. The global war on terrorism is a U.S. undertaking, which is fake. It's based on fake premises. It tells us that somehow America and the Western world are going after a fictitious enemy, the Islamic State, when in fact the Islamic State is fully supported and financed by the Western military alliance and America's allies in the Persian Gulf. They say Muslims are terrorists, but it just so happens that terrorists are made in America. The fact that Donald Trump seems to support and continue on with the terror war industry, as those before him did, suggests he is just another puppet or part of this powerful cabal looking to establish their new world order. On the other hand, prior to his election we did reference Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton as being key catalysts in the creation of ISIS. Are we seeing the same thing we saw with Al-Qaeda? He also called out election fraud and political ties to big finance, something that was further revealed by Wikileaks, who, all of a sudden, became a Russian source of misinformation for the first time in a decade, with absolutely no proof. If anything, other information from whistleblowers and declassified documents from other sources lend even more credibility to Wikileaks. The truth is, there is no Islamic army or terrorist group called Al-Qaeda, and any informed intelligence officer knows this. But, there is a propaganda campaign to make the public believe in the presence of an intensified entity representing the devil only in order to drive TV watchers to accept a unified international leadership for a war against terrorism. The country behind this propaganda is the United States. Robin Cook, former British Foreign Secretary. The fact that Trump even mentioned this is both shocking and confusing given that, on the surface, it seems he fully supports this war that's based on fake premises. And his comments on Hillary and Obama's ties to ISIS, despite being ridiculed in the mainstream, actually have a lot of evidence behind them. See, award-winning American journalist exposes the true origin of ISIS and the war on terror. So perhaps when it comes to this so-called war, Trump has some inside intel we are not aware of. On the other hand, Trump has and continues to go against the will of some very powerful people. Obama, Clinton, and Bush all seem to be, in my opinion, easy and willing puppets for the corporations, but Trump is not. This is exactly why you'll always see Donald Trump bashed by the corporate media. Richard Dolan sums it up quite well. For more than a year, we have been told that Trump is a racist, sexist, xenophobe, liar, cheat, and narcissist. The attack bears all the marks of a coordinated effort among the major news outlets, CNN, NIT, WAPO, HuffPo, USA Today, and the rest. It reminded me very much of the concerted media attack against Brazil's Dilma Rousseff, which culminated earlier in 2016 in her impeachment and removal from power. In the case of Rousseff, we see what has been alternately described as a soft coup or a Wall Street coup, rather along the lines of the color revolutions of a few years earlier, which are now largely understood as CIA NGO orchestrated. In both cases, pretexts were created and hammered home by an insistent media that whipped up public opinion. In Brazil, it worked. It seemed like it would work in the US. It is important to understand why Trump was demonized. To be sure, his character makes it easy. There is no shortage of narcissistic, sexist, or otherwise offensive statements in his repertoire from which to draw. But I have never and will never believe this is why he was demonized. Ultimately, Trump is a disruptor, and his disruption falls squarely against the two key pillars of the American ruling elite's ideology, neoliberalism and neoconservatism. Unlike traditional liberalism and conservatism, neoliberalism and neoconservatism are not opposites. Neoliberalism is just another name for transnational globalization, while neoconservatism is nothing other than the US-dominated global empire project. They work together, two inhuman, anti-human processes that ensure a tiny minority of people control and own all the water, minerals, drugs, GM foods, and everything else worth owning in this world. Hillary Clinton, as the ultimate representative of such an agenda, received unwavering support from all segments of that establishment, certainly from the media. Trump, on the other hand, was vilified. Trump is not a New World Order global empire builder. He does not bother trying to hide his flaws or look good for the public. I do not support Trump, and clearly he has done and said a lot of crazy things, but he is not in the pockets of these elite, and they are responding to his defiance by bashing him every chance they get. This includes releasing false information and staging events, like the FBI incident we will get into later. The corporate media looked on and praised George Bush for what was done in Iraq, as well as what was done to Libya under the Obama and Clinton administrations, despite the fact that these horrors were enacted based on lies and greed. Past administrations caused the wreck of a nation and the destruction of millions of lives, yet Trump spoke out against all of these and remains a villain, while Obama won the Nobel Peace Prize. It doesn't make much sense, does it? The power mainstream media has over our perception of major events, people, and more is truly astonishing. You can read more about that in this article. Declassified CIA documents shows agencies' control over mainstream media, academia. Trump has spoken out multiple times against the big businesses and corporate media that control American politics. He has also dismantled the TPP and raised concerns over the fraudulent science that could be coming from the EPA and other government organizations. Trump was made to look like a fool for pulling his funding from the EPA, but the EPA, just like the FDA, has become a cesspool of corruption. Many medical professionals have spoken out against the close ties between corporations and science, and how much of our published science today could actually be completely false. This would be in order to approve the pesticides that are sprayed on our food, or the glyphosate that's found practically everywhere now. I'll bet you didn't hear that perspective from the mainstream media, did you? Instead, we simply heard that Trump doesn't care about the environment, without ever realizing that neither does the EPA. To learn more and to see one out of many examples, you can read about genetically modified foods and the fraudulent science used to approve them in the article linked below. Federal lawsuit forces the U.S. government to divulge secret files on genetically engineered foods. Peer-reviewed science losing credibility as large amounts of research shown to be false. He is also speaking out against vaccines. The above are multiple reasons why Trump has probably been the most vilified president in United States history, but that's only because all we've been presented with is that perspective. A perspective on the FBI director you won't hear in the mainstream. According to Michelle Chossudovsky, an award-winning author, an emeritus professor of economics at the University of Ottawa, and the founder and director of the Center for Research on Globalization, CRG. The recommendation to fire Comey did not emanate from the White House. It was an initiative of U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, who prepared a 3-page memorandum, which criticized James Comey for his handling of the Clinton email investigation and the release of his October 28, 2016 second letter to Congress 11 days before Election Day. The Attorney General's office visibly acted in defiance of the White House. He recently published an article on his website titled, "Who was behind the firing of FBI Director James Comey? What political interests are being served? Who is Andrew McCabe?" Chossudovsky argues that this has been a propaganda campaign to draw even more negative attention toward Trump, with the goal of getting him impeached. The firing of Comey was intended to weaken the president and provide ammunition to the smear campaign against him. The Attorney General's recommendation to fire Comey will eventually backlash on President Trump in the context of the Russia probe, namely the investigation into the fake collusion between Moscow and the Trump campaign. This is indeed the perspective of experts that you will never hear from the mainstream media. Any type of information presented against the mainstream media narrative will always be attacked, and that's important to keep in mind. North Korea. As mentioned earlier, Vladimir Putin is not the only one who called out global media and the elite, claiming that they use imaginary and mythical threats to control us. In an age plagued with false information, why should we continue believing everything we receive from corporate media? So much fake news has been dished out by these networks on a number of topics, like 9/11 for example, that it's nearly impossible for anybody to determine what is real and what isn't. As a result of these controversies, mainstream authorities decided to designate a fake news checker. But this only created more backlash, because people understand that the solution is not to censor the information that people see, but rather teach them how to assess that information using critical thinking skills. If our source of truth has become a television screen, we are in big trouble. We should all be able to determine what constitutes fake news and what a credible source is. We don't need Snoops.com doing it for us. When it comes to North Korea, we could be seeing the same situation as we are seeing with Iran in Syria, or what we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan. There always seems to be some major threat that requires our military intervention, but we never hear anything from the other side. Anyone who questions the mainstream media narrative is made to look ridiculous. But can you blame the average person? Especially with all of the negative propaganda within the mainstream media, as well as the entertainment industry? What we know of North Korea simply comes from corporate media telling us it is like this. Most of these mainstream media stories pertaining to global events are still believed by many, and the fact that the simple suggestion that they may be false or misleading is greeted with harsh criticism tells us a lot. A viewpoint that differs from the mainstream narrative should hold equal plausibility, especially in the face of a narrative that simply comes from mainstream media intelligence, which is usually considered evidence. It can be hard to entertain the idea that what we are being told about major global events isn't entirely true, and that the wool has been pulled over our eyes. At the same time, all of the information leading to this belief is backed up by tremendous amounts of evidence. It didn't just come from anywhere, which gives you something to think about. Concluding comments. Here at CE, we believe there to be a massive shift in consciousness currently taking place. One important part of this shift is a change in how we see, feel, and think about our world. Information alone has played a huge role in opening up our minds to new possibilities that once didn't fit the accepted framework of knowledge. As time moves on, we are questioning what it is we are doing here, and starting to wake up to the fact that not everything is as we've been told. Much of what was previously labeled as a conspiracy theory now has significant backing and evidence behind it. Confronting and acknowledging the deception that currently exists in our world is not easy, and some of it is so downright unbelievable that the human mind simply isn't ready to accept it. Nevertheless, it's just information. It's our mind that labels it good or bad without stopping to realize that it's all just one human experience, but that which does not resonate with us is something we clearly want to change. So much of the misinformation, corruption, and greed underlying almost all aspects of our lives is now becoming visible, and as a result, our perception of the planet is changing. And as a result of that perception shift, physical material reality is also beginning to shift, and we are starting to manifest a new human experience. Obviously, this is a process, but it's happening right now and we're currently living in it.
That's the news. Join us here every day. Be sure to subscribe and click the bell. See you next time.
This is TBNN.